I'd now like to introduce you to something called flash fill. Often data isn't in a format that we can readily use, and so what we need to do is use formulas or flash fill to get the data processed so that we can use it in our presentations. The first thing I want to do is I want to join together the first name and the last name to create a full name. So I'm just going to go to I1 and type full name. Now what I want to do in I2 is type Abby Newman, because that is the first and last name of the first person in my row 2. Now the spelling is absolutely critical. If this doesn't work properly, then it's probably a spelling error. But if I now go to I3 and press the key combination Control E, that will flash fill and fill down all the other full names. And then double click to adjust the column width. Let's say I also need to see the year that they were born. So I'm going to type 1978. In the next cell down, I'll simply press Control E, and that will flash fill the year that they were born. Let's also think I need to see their initials. So I'm going to click on column J, press Control plus to insert a column, type in J1 initials, and then in J2 I'm going to put A full stop, N full stop, press enter and Control E, and that will give me all the initials. Flash fill is also on the data tab in the ribbon. It's this button here called flash fill, and Control E is mentioned as the shortcut key. Now sometimes we also need to split data. Let's imagine, for example, that we didn't have a column called first name and we didn't have a column called last name. So I'm going to select these two columns and Control minus to delete them. Let's say I have to split this full name into a separate first name and last name column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select G2, press Control Shift down arrow, and I'm going to go to Data in the ribbon and choose this option, Text to Columns. Text to columns, if I take a moment to read the screen tip, is purpose-built, fit for purpose to split a single column into multiple columns. I'll click this button. Most of our data nowadays is delimited by a certain character. In this case, the first name and the last name are delimited by a space. So I'm going to go next and accept the option delimited. It's at this point I can tell it that it's a space. So I'll say it's not a tab that separates the first name from the last name. It's actually a space. And when I tick this, watch what happens in the data preview. It indicates where it's going to split it. If I then click next, it says where do you want to put it, and it wants to put it in G2 over the top of my existing full name. I'm not keen about that, so I'm just moving this window over. I'm going to drag over the G2 and I'm going to click on J2 to replace it. I'll then click the finish button and it will have split my first names and last names into separate columns. So I can just call this one first name and this one last name. So if you ever need to split data into multiple columns, that's what this button is to do, text to columns. Now sometimes we don't have everything that we need in one list. Sometimes we have what we need in one list and something else that we need in a second list. So I want to show you how you use VLOOKUP functions to look up information associated in this case with a member ID in another list and pull it through into this list. Let's say, for example, I want to know the ethnicity of each of my members. So I'm going to type the heading ethnicity. Then I'm going to go to J2 and use a VLOOKUP equals V. Now if I click on it once, I can read what a VLOOKUP is about. And if I just scroll over a bit so you can see. But basically it looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table and returns a value on the same row from a column that we specify. I'm going to double click VLOOKUP. Now the VLOOKUP has 4 arguments, each separated by a comma. So here's your first argument, here's the second argument, here's the third argument, and the fourth argument appears in square brackets. Now the square brackets is Excel saying to you this is optional, so you don't actually have to give it 4 arguments, you could get away with 3. Let's have a look at it. So the first thing it says to me is where's the value that you want to look up? Well, I want to look up this membership ID, so I click it. That's the first argument, so I press comma to move on to the second argument. The second argument says if I look at that membership number 30007, where is the other table that's got the other information you want to pull in? Well, that would be in the sheet called extra data. and particularly it would be the cell A2, and I'm going to press Control-Shift right arrow and Control-Shift down arrow so I select the entire table. Now I'm going to lock in the A2 so that when I fill this formula down later, the A2 doesn't change to A3, A4, A5, A6, and the C201 doesn't change to C202, 203. So I'm going to press the function key F4. F4 locks in those cell references and basically applies dollars. I now want to press comma and move on to my third argument. Now you can see here my third argument is what is the number of the column in this table that has got what you want. Do you want what's in column 1, column 2 or column 3? Now it insists that it's a number. Now I want the ethnicity. That's in the third column, so I type 3. I could stop there and just deal with 3 arguments, but if I don't put the fourth argument, it will default to true. And true means that if it can't find the membership ID in the first list and then in this list, then it will find the closest approximate member. And that's not what I want. I want it to find the exact member number. So when I press comma, I'm going to choose the option false because I need an exact match. Double click false and press enter. And so this particular member, 30007, is Māori. If I click on Māori and I double click the thin black cross, it'll fill out the ethnicity for each and every member. If I double click to adjust the column width. Now let's just test that true-false situation. If I went here and put 3, it would put not available. Basically, member ID 3 does not exist in the table, and I don't want it to find the closest match, so it says it's not available. If I go undo and put the number back in, I get Māori again. Let's have a look at the formulas. There's a really nice button on the Formulas tab called Show Formulas. When I click it, the columns go very wide, but if I scroll across a little bit, I can see my actual formula. By us putting dollars on the A2 did not adjust to A3, A4, A5. By putting a dollar on C201, it stopped it from changing. So that's why we put dollars on those cell references. But we didn't put dollars on this cell reference because I want the A2 to go A3, A4, A5, A6 and pick up each and every member ID. So that is why we use F4 to apply dollars. And that is the VLOOKUP. Now the reason it's a VLOOKUP is because the list that you're looking at here, the table, is vertical. So VLOOKUP means it's a vertical list. There is an HLOOKUP function if your lists actually happen to be horizontal and not vertical, but nowadays most of our lists are vertical. I'm going back to data and I'm going to turn off show formulas. Alright, and control home back to the top. Now, there is actually a new kid on the block. The VLOOKUP has been around for a very, very long time, since the beginning of time really. And it's very, very good, but it's quite temperamental. The VLOOKUP insists that the table is sorted by the ID column. It also insists that the ID or the value that you're looking up has to be the first column in the table. And so sometimes the VLOOKUP can easily throw errors if the ID column is not the first column, it's maybe the second, and if it's not sorted. So in response to this, Microsoft have created a new function that I think is better. It's more robust, let's say. Let's go to M2 and I'm going to type status. So I want to look up the status of each member, but I don't want to use the VLOOKUP, I want to use the XLOOKUP. Equals X. If I double click XLOOKUP, this actually has a number of arguments. Let me just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 arguments. But notice the last 3 are in square brackets, which means you don't have to use them if you don't want to. The first thing I want to do is look up a value, and that would be the member ID, comma. Then it says, where am I going to find this value in a lookup? So I'll go to extra data, and I'll tell it to look at A2, Control Shift down arrow, to A201. I'll then press F4 to lock that in. comma. It then says if I look up the member ID and I find it in the range in column A, where is the range that's got what you want returned? Well, I want the status returned, so that's in B2 to B201, and I'll lock that in with F4. So quite a different function. It doesn't require a table and then the number of the column you want. You basically look up a value, find it in this range, and return what's in this range, which means that the ID doesn't have to be the first column. I'm going to press comma and have a look at some of the other arguments. The next argument is, what if I don't find the member? Then I'll just return, double quote, member is not in the list. That's what I want to say if it's not found, double quote, comma. Here it says, do you want to find the closest smallest value or the closest largest value or the closest sort of pattern character match, or does it have to be an exact match? I want it to be an exact match, so I'm going to double click 0, comma. Then it says, do you want to search from top to bottom or bottom to top? Various ways of searching, which implies that you don't have to have the ID in the table actually sorted. So I'm going to double click first to last and press enter. So I can find out that member 30007 is employed. Now if I change this to 3, the VLOOKUP says not available, the XLOOKUP says member is not in the list, and I'll change it back to 30007. If I then click on that formula, double click the thin black cross to fill it down, I have the status of each of my members. So the VLOOKUP and the XLOOKUP are the two major ways that you look up a value in a list, find auxiliary or supporting information in another list, and return it. The VLOOKUP's been around for a long time, the XLOOKUP is the new one, and the XLOOKUP is more robust, so if you have the option to choose the XLOOKUP. Now I'm looking at my data and I'm looking at my members, and I now want to calculate, based on the join date in column D, just how many years these members have been part of our organisation. So I'm going to go to column N, and in N1 I'm going to put membership years. And I'm going to use a DATEDIF function. So in N2, I'm going equals DAT. Now DATEDIF is one of the functions that actually doesn't get listed. So I actually have to type DATEDIF. And I want to know the difference between, so open bracket, this particular date here, which is the date that they joined, comma, and today's date. Today is another function. Open bracket, close bracket. So I want the difference between these two dates, comma, but I want to see it in years. So I'm going to go double quote, Y double quote. So when I press enter, that's going to give me the difference between the date they joined and today's date in total years. And so if I go yes to the correction, it's given me 10 years. The error was because I got lazy and didn't put the close bracket. But if I have a look at this, Abby joined in the year 2013, and this is the year 2023, so she's been a member for 10 years. And so I'll double click and I'll fill that down. Now once I know how long they've been members in terms of years, anybody that has served more than 20 years is considered a life member. So I now want to show, let me just put a column heading in here, life members, and I want to show you how to use an if function. I want to put an if function that says if the membership years is greater than or equal to 20, then yes, they're a life member. So equals I, then press tab or double click if, whichever you prefer. The if function has 3 arguments. It performs some sort of test, comma, what do you want to do if the test result is true, comma, what do you want to do if the test result is false. Now my test is if this value here is greater than or equal to 20, comma. If that's true, then in double quotes they are a life member, double quote. If it's not true, comma, then I want to see just double quote member. They're just a member. And close bracket. When I press enter, anybody who is greater than or equal to 20 years in terms of membership will appear as a life member and have some more life members. So that's an example of an if function. Let's do another if function. This time I want to put my members into age bands. So I'll type age bands. Now if a member is greater than 75 years of age, I want them in the band that says 75 plus. If they're greater than 50 and less than 75, they fall into the 50 to 75. If they're greater than 25 and if they're less than 25. Let's show you how we do this. I'm going to go equals I to call up the if function. Either double click it or press tab. If this age here is greater than 75, that's my test, comma, then I want to show if that's true, double quote, 75 plus, double quote, comma. Now if that's false, I want to do another if. So I'm going to say I can either press tab or I can double click the if. If the age is greater than or equal to 50, comma, if that's true, then double quote, they fall into 50 to 75, double quote. So here we've dealt with all of those greater than 75, and if they're not greater than 75, then they must be between 50 and 75. If they're greater than 50, then they fall between 50 and 75, comma. But if, tab, that value in F2 is greater than or equal to 25, comma, then double quote 25 to 50, double quote. If that's not true, then they must be less than 25, so less than 25, double quote. So if F2 is greater than 75, then say 75 plus, but if F2 is greater than or equal to 50, say 50 to 75, but if F2 is greater than 25, then say 25 to 50, otherwise just say less than 25. For every if, and there's 1, 2, 3 of them, then we have 1, 2, 3 close brackets. And this is what we call a nested if statement. You can nest up to 64, and this is 3. So when I press enter, Abby, because she's 45, falls into the 25 to 50 band. If I click on that and then double click, I can fill it down and I can see people falling into the different age bands. So those are examples of if functions. Now what I want to look at is some aggregate functions. These functions we've dealt with so far, VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, if statements, they're called row iterative functions. They work on a row by row basis. If we want aggregates, then we're wanting to know how many life members have we got, how many Asian members have we got, how many members are based in Tauranga. Those are aggregate functions. I'm going to ask you to insert a new sheet. So I'm going to hit this plus here. And I'm just going to double click its name and call it calculations. So our data is in one sheet, our calculations are in another, and our options are in another. Now let's just take some of these options. I'm just going to select these options that we made earlier, copy them, and put them into my calculation sheet. So I'm just going to press enter. I'm just going to double click between A and B, C and D, E and F, just to widen the columns. And I may even insert a column, Control plus where B is, Control plus where E is, and Control plus where H is, just so I get this little heading here. I'm going to click on this cell, hold the Control and click on this cell and this cell, and in all three cells I want to see the word number. And then I'll press Control Enter, not Enter. Control Enter fills in all the selected cells with what you just typed. Then I can double click again to adjust the width of those columns. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to count if a member is based in Mount Maunganui. That is a function called COUNTIFS equals COU. Now COUNTIF is the old one. It only allows you to have one condition. COUNTIFS is the newer one. It allows you to have a set of conditions, in fact a set of up to 127 conditions. Let's double click COUNTIFS. Now I want to count if the data sheet and the E column, comma, matches the calculation sheet and A2. So this formula says count if the data sheet E column matches the calculation sheet A2. And when I press enter, 19 of our members are based in Mount Maunganui. If I click on that and then double click to fill it down, 7 are based in Aotearoa, 10 in Papamoa, 23 in Paispa, 70 in Tauranga, 69 in Te Puke, and 2 in Te Puna. If I want to total those values, I'll click at the foot of that list and I'll press the key combination Alt equals equals. And that's a quick way to total those numbers. Now I should always end up with 200 because we've currently got 200 members. Let's now count the members by ethnicity. In E2 equals COU, and I'm going to double click COUNTIFS. My range to look at is in the sheet called data and in the column that has ethnicity, which is column L, comma. The ones I want to count is in the sheet called calculations and in the cell D2. So it's going to look at data column L and count the ones that match the calculation sheet in the cell D2. So the number of Asian members I have is 16. If I click on the 16, double click to fill it down, then go to the foot of that column and go Alt equals equals, it's a total of 189 members. So someone's missing. So to check what's happened, I go to my data, I go to my ethnicity column, I'll press Control down arrow, and I can see O'Connell showing here. I can also see that my VLOOKUP function stopped at row 190. If I fill that down to the very bottom of my list, then if I go back to my calculations, I have the correct number of members, 26 Asian, 20 of European descent, and 44 Māori, etc. All right, let's have a look at the number of members so you can see the importance of the checks and balances. Let's have a look at the number of members that are employed. Equals COU, double click COUNTIFS, COUNTIF data, column M, comma, matches calculations, cell G2. 157 of our members are employed, 26 are retired, and 17 unemployed. Let's check if this is correct. Alt equals equals 200, so we know it's correct. Some of the other things that we might like to count, for example, are age bands. Our age bands, let me just type bands, were less than 25, between 25 and 50, between 50 and 75, and 75 plus. This, I want to say number, and in here I'm going to go equals COU, and say COUNTIFS, column P, comma, matches calculations J2. 0 members are less than 25 years of age, 105 members are between the ages of 25 and 50. If I click at the foot of the list and go Alt equals equals, I'm checking that I get the answer 200. We may also want to count how many life members we have. So I'm just going to put status here, or maybe type of membership. You're either a life member or you're a member. And then the number of each. If I click here and type equals COU, I can count if this particular column here, O, comma, matches this particular cell, M2. We have 30 life members, 170 that are not, obviously 200, but Alt equals equal, just for verification, that we have all our members included in those statistics. COUNTIFS by far is the most popular, but there is also an AVERAGEIFS and a SUMIFS. What if I want to know the average age of our members by maybe gender? So I'm going to go here and type gender, and I'm going to put female, male, and I'm going to put age, and here I'll put equals AV, and I'm going to go for AVERAGEIFS. average if this data sheet, let me scroll up to the top, this age column is what I want to average, comma, but only where this column here, B, so average column F, where column B, comma, matches calculations P2. Average column F, where column B matches P2. The average age of a female is 48 years old and the average age of a male is 50. We can then go home and we can decrease the decimal places and round those off to whole numbers. And likewise, there's the SUMIFS as well. So very, very useful functions. What I'd now like to do is just save what we've done so far, Control S or the Save button. I'd also like to go back to my data and I'd quickly like to format this data as a table, just so that it's easy for people to read. One of the things I find a little bit annoying is having to scroll and lose the column headings. So let's just sit somewhere in this table, and you can use this button, Format as a Table, and choose a style from the gallery. But if you're wanting a quick fix, Control T. And it immediately wiggles around the table, so I'm just going to go OK, and I've immediately formatted this as a table. So now when I scroll down, I don't lose those column headings, they stay visible. It also gives me banded rows, which makes it easy for my reader to read across. If my reader tends to read down and not across, I can turn off the banded rows on the Table Design tab, which only appears because this is formatted as a table and because I'm sitting in it. So I can take off the banded rows, instead turn on the banded columns, because maybe my readers tend to read down. Or I can take off the columns and put on the rows. If I thought I don't like the blue that it's given me by default, which I actually think is a very good color, you have got a gallery here where you can roll over the various styles and decide which is more suitable or which is more in tune with your branding. So you've got various styles here. As soon as I click away from the table, outside here, Table Design disappears from the ribbon, and as soon as I click back on the table, it reappears and I can go into it. The filter button automatically comes on. I can turn that off and turn that on. The style I can change, the banded rows and columns I can change, and I can even add a total row. If I click total row, I'm thrown to the foot of my table. It's taken the liberty to total or sum the count the age bands, but I could actually ask it to count the full names. So I click here and say count the names. I could actually go to age, which is here, and ask it to average the age. And so you've got a total row where you can actually say you want to count, average, sum a particular column.